Exceptional teams create very predictable results at a very high quality all the time. So to do that, they have to have systems and protocols in place that they follow and ways of measuring it.
One thing that new leaders are often hesitant to do is to tell their teams how to get work done or to create standard systems for how work gets done. The truth is that no work happens in a vacuum, and the best people often create systems for how to document what they're working on, how to back up their work, how to send updates to clients, and all those things that just have to happen in order for work to be done effectively. And if you let everyone on your team come up with their own way to get all these things done, then there's a chance that these various systems are going to come into conflict. And the overall productivity of your team is going to be harmed. This week's guest on the Leadership Launchpad is David Hirschfeld, a 35-year software development veteran with a unique perspective on technological innovation and business growth that he currently uses at the company he founded, Techies. David specializes in AI-driven workflow transformation for scale-ups and startups. Having collaborated with over 70 startups, he developed the first launch method, a systematic approach that minimizes risks and accelerates software company success with reduced reliance on investor funding. This episode really touches on this idea of how do you create systems that will enable your teams to be incredibly successful. We start off talking a little bit about the current state of AI software development, which I thought was a really interesting discussion. We then dive a little bit deeper into understanding why so many founders or the people with kind of this founder intent tend to build too much and lose focus on the problem that they're trying to solve. And then we finally dive into the importance of systems. It's really a great discussion. But before we get into that discussion, I do want to remind you that if this is your first time listening to the show, please make sure you subscribe so that you never miss a future episode. And if you are listening to my voice right now and you happen to be someone who is responsible for leadership development in your organization, I would love to talk to you. Please reach out to me at matt@bettereverydaystudios.com so we can see if we can help make the leaders in your organization better. With that, let's get into the discussion with David Hirschfeld. David, welcome to the Leadership Launchpad. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Matt.
Yeah, I'm really excited that you reached out to me and that we kind of connected a week or so ago and started talking because you have a very interesting business. And so I wanted to start there could you tell us a little bit more about Techies and kind of what you've been doing the last few years?
Yeah, sure. Well, founded Techies 18 years ago. And it was after I had two startups, one in the 90s that I sold in 2000. That was a successful exit. And then one in 95 that I failed in 97. So that was a failure. So I've seen both
Okay.
sides just from
Excellent.
my own personal experience in terms of
Yep.
startups.
Yep.
And the second one failed because I didn't follow the playbook that I followed the first time, not realizing exactly what that playbook was.
Yep.
Anyway, then I founded Techies in 2007, so that's 18 years ago. And we've been working with startups and scale ups, doing custom software development for that whole time. And some of my clients are even, 10 years. I've had them for 10 years or more.
Oh, wow.
Uh,
Oh, wow.
yeah. Yeah. Where we become their outsourced IT and development
Yeah.
team.
Yeah. Wow. So you've been doing that for a while. I guess, well, since I have you, you're the perfect person to ask this question. I don't think it was on the list that I originally sent you, but it always piques my interest.
Yeah.
Because I always get different opinions. What is happening with AI coding right now? Is that something that you're really leaning into? Like, I keep hearing that that's transforming software teams.
Well, it's very funny that you brought that up because this will be my fourth conversation today about
Yeah,
that topic with
that's
people on
funny.
my team and customers. And anyway, so everything Um, we've been benchmarking really in the last 2 months. We've been benchmarking and trying to do problem solving. So this has gone through a big evolution because
Yeah.
the technology is changing so quickly.
Yeah.
And we've been using AI code generation in some form or fashion for 2.5 to 3 years now, right? For building small modules
Yep.
or refactoring small pieces of code and then growing and growing. About 7, 8 months ago, I started trying out some of the code gen tools that can build full applications.
Yep.
And as recently as a couple weeks ago, I even tried one of those. Some things like Replit and Bolt
Yep.
and Vercel and
Yep.
products like this, and they all provide some value, but they fall short in some really
Yep.
key ways. And so we're not
Yep.
able to use those to build whole applications. We want to
Okay.
build a very simple prototype of an application that has
Mm.
some functionality. We can do that pretty well with those. But if we get into any sophisticated, not even sophisticated, but well, the semi-sophisticated functionality, they just fall apart, and they don't write good code, and they don't architect the code properly, and so
Right.
there's big limitations that we have in those tools. Um,
Interesting.
uh, Okay, but that was no. I thought we might be able to use that for quick MVPs. We're a long way from that.
Interesting.
However, so we've been testing all the code editors, and we've found Cursor so far to be the best code editor
Yep.
that for AI code editing, but it has some huge limitations. So
Yep.
the problem with all these tools is there's a context problem.
Yes.
When we as so I This is how I liken it. If you want me to explain what I mean by this context problem for the listeners,
Yeah. Yeah.
when you're developing software, you're like a juggler, and the more you concentrate, the more balls or the more things you can keep in the air at the same time.
Yeah.
So I think I liken it to spinning plates, like on
Okay.
sticks. Um, it's pretty easy. Most of our tasks is spin 3 plates. Even 4 plates isn't too tough. But you get to the fifth plate, you start the level of concentration starts to grow significantly. And when you're working on really complex architectural and coding issues where you have to keep all different aspects of the application in your
Yeah.
brain
Head
at
at the same
different
time.
levels simultaneously.
Yeah.
It's like having 7 or 8 plates all spinning at the same time.
Yeah.
And you've probably walked in on a developer who's in the middle of one of those and you said, "Hey, I've got a quick question, Matt." And the arms go
Ah.
up in the air,
Yeah.
right? And they freak out
Yeah.
because they realize how much energy it's going to take to spin
Yeah.
all the plates up because they're listening to them all crash and break on the floor,
Yeah.
right?
I'm
And I remember,
imagining there's a scene, old movie Swordfish, where Hugh Jackman plays a coder, and there's this scene where he's like deep in, or maybe yeah, he's coding some like software virus, and he's like drinking wine, and music is blaring. He's got 18 screens up, and he's just like deep in it. Anyway.
right. Exactly, exactly. And then nobody you don't interrupt them, right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
remember I remember when my wife was doing her national boards. This is like your PhD if you're a school teacher. Most school teachers don't do it because it's such a big deal to do it. It's a lot of work. But anyway,
Yeah.
she was writing her national boards, and it was the same thing because she had to keep all these different pieces of information in her head,
Yeah.
and all these because there's a lot of evidence that she collects in her own classroom as she's teaching certain things, and all of that has to be in her head while she's writing this very complex. And I'd walk into her office, I'd say, "Becca, can I?" And she'd go, "Not now, not now, not now." It was so
Yeah.
funny.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's something that AI sucks at.
Yeah. And
So
I think
AI knows
it,
all, yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
it's funny because I've even noticed that in just simple usages of doing some basic research for a course I'm creating or something like that. And it is when you try to have kind of like a dialogue of, yeah, that was interesting, but what about this direction? Or can you give me a little bit more information? After two or three of those back and forths, you can totally notice it like dropping off pieces of context that you gave it early, and it
Right.
focuses on this thing and expands on that, but it forgets that you had like pinned it in on this thing. So that's interesting. That's
Right.
great to hear. Thank you for that kind of side road, because though we're going to be talking about leadership development, I promise the listeners, I know that's why you're here, so we'll get back to that.
Okay.
But I do think this is such a perfect example of the thing that all leaders need to, keep a touch on. And
Mhm.
sometimes it's hard to know who to believe, what the current state is, what are things really like for practitioners. And so for a practitioner like you, I thought it was the perfect time
Mhm.
to ask that question. So thank you for kind of giving us the lay of the land from your perspective.
I do want to add one little thing there. We are
Great.
working to solve this problem, as everybody else is.
Yeah.
The real problem is that AI doesn't realize when its context has shifted that there's something else out there it may need to consider,
Hmm.
but it's not considering. Where
Mm-hmm.
we as people know that, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're getting
Mm-hmm.
into an area, we're not focused on this other area, but we know it might have an effect on that, and so maybe we need to back up and
Yeah.
take a look. And right, AI doesn't do that, not
Yeah.
yet. Right. And what it
Yeah.
does
Of
is it says,
course.
oh, this is my new context, and it runs away with it, very often
Exactly.
destroying good work it's done before
Yes.
that, which is right. And then we have to manage and control that. There are some tools coming out from OpenAI and from Claude and from Google that are trying to kind of rein in this problem,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
give you and continue to keep the full context in its mind, but it's still not there. And we are
Yeah.
working at building scaffolding around this as well to do it, because right now we're probably at about 40 acceleration, 40 to 80% acceleration, depending on the
Okay.
area that we're working on from what
Yeah.
we were 6 months or 9 months ago.
Oh,
We want
great.
to get to I want to get to 90% consistently across the board.
Yeah.
And we've got there's some big things that have to happen for us, because that would put us at 10x,
Yeah.
from the productivity and acceleration, and that's huge, right?
Yeah.
That's
Absolutely.
huge.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, in that discussion, one of the things you mentioned is that, making minimum viable products is one of the first things that you're trying to use AI for. In our last discussion, I think one of the things that you focused a lot on, and I don't know if this is exactly part of kind of the protocol that you mentioned, launch first and things, but one of the things that you mentioned was that it's really hard for leaders to stay focused and not overbuild. That one of the things that it's easy for a leader to do is to just kind of tr- lose track of the story. What's the most important thing right now, and get focused on a lot of details that don't matter.
Mhm.
Why do you think that's so hard? What makes that so hard in your experience with all the startups you've worked with?
Um, it's it's a basic perspective, and that's a really good question. I think it's just a basic perspective of founders, because to start something new, that like what a founder's doing, they have to step out of their comfort zone and go in a direction and create. And that
Mhm.
creative process, you need a lot of motivation to do that. A lot of people aren't motivated to do that. They want security and comfort, but founders seek this kind of excitement.
Mhm.
And it's not exciting to do the hard work, the analysis, the constant reflection, the risk mitigation planning.
Mhm.
Those
Mhm.
aren't the fun tasks, unless you just happen to be that kind of founder that finds all that stuff fun. But usually, the people that find that kind of stuff fun aren't the ones that are creating new businesses. So it's a natural tendency to go towards the thing that's exciting, which is the creation part. And the problem is you might be creating something that nobody cares about.
Yeah.
And that's where founders go off track. So
Yeah.
founders that understand that their business is about the problem, that their potential customers are dealing with, and every aspect and nuance of that problem, um, and um, and and wanting to spend their time talking with customers. Those are the founders that will consistently find a path to success, because the customers and the problems continually remind them of what they need to focus on.
Yeah. As you're talking, the thing that tell me if this is kind of what you're mentioning. I always think about like house projects. I used to be really bad about starting too many house projects, because one thing that I realized is that when you are 90% of the way like visually done,
Yeah.
you're 50% of the way actually done, right? Because it's
Right.
that last visual 10% is really like 50% of the time. Is this like the small little tweaks, the little cleanups, the oh, I got to measure this just precisely. And yeah, I think it is really hard to be somebody who likes to do something new but can also focus on the details.
It's funny, you say house projects. So, first of all, what you're talking about is there's a director of development of a big firm that I worked with maybe 15 years ago, and what he called this being done. So not just being done, but then making sure that all of the I's are dotted, all the T's are crossed, all the deployment things are done, the communications and delivery and documentation, right? So that when you say you're done, you're really done.
Yeah.
Um, so he called that done, and that has always worked. As far as house projects go, that's like my passion. Is I love woodworking
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
building and creating in that way as well, right? And when my wife says, "How long will that take you?" and I say, "Oh, I'll probably have it done this weekend," she immediately multiplies by four. Yeah, and then
Yes. Yeah.
and she's usually right.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned this in the context of founders, but I think it's often a lot of the people that get attracted to startups as well. And a lot of those early leaders in startups get attracted to startups, at least in my experience, because
Yeah.
they are that builder kind of personality. And so whether
Hmm.
you're working, with the founders or some of those early leaders, you mentioned it's kind of like a perspective shift. Have you developed any methods or questions that you ask, or just how do you help people, and what can people do themselves to kind of like break that shift? If somebody's listening to this and being like, oh yeah, maybe we are doing too many things, or maybe my team is suffering from a lack of focus right now, how can
Hmm.
you refocus in on kind of making sure you're focusing on the right problem, the right customers, that kind of thing?
Okay, I want to talk about it from two different perspectives. One is kind
Great.
of like how I talk to founders when I start working with them. And the first thing I ask him is I say, "What's your product? What are the requirements? What?" And then I say, "Okay, what's the genesis of this? What's the
Hmm.
problem it solves? What I'll explain."
Yep.
And getting them to describe the problem is usually a lot of effort. Founders they
Interesting.
usually lost the problem already at that point because they've decided they want to build this thing. So when I say, "What's the problem you're
Interesting.
solving?" and they'll start telling me about, well, this will just make it easier for so and so, right? And I say, okay, that's kind of a benefit. What's the problem it's solving? And then they
Hmm.
go, well, it's solve it. It's what it's doing is it's giving you the ability to do this. And I say, okay, that's a feature, but it
That's
sounds
great.
like a great feature, but I don't know what's the I'm not hearing a problem statement. This is very
Yeah.
common conversation. Almost all founders, not all, but almost all
Interesting.
founders um, have a lot of trouble articulating a problem statement. And then when I finally get them to articulate a problem statement, it's usually a very high level one because they haven't nailed a step back, put their feet in the shoes of the person who they're solving the problem for, and
Mm.
thinking, what is the real struggle? Why it doesn't matter? If they're not talking about why that person feels threatened by this problem because it's going to cause this terrible outcome if I don't solve it, they're not at the root level problem, and that's really where you have to get to.
Yeah.
So that's usually the first process a conversation I
Okay.
have with founders is getting
Yeah.
them kind of redirected, and then I'm constantly asking them about the problem. They want to talk about features. I want them to stop talking about features and forget features even exist. The feature will just naturally happen as we mitigate the problem. But
Yeah.
if you don't know what problem you're mitigating, you're not building the right thing. So you should only be talking about founders that love the problem find paths to success, and the ones that love their products fail all the time.
Yeah. That was one of the biggest things that came out of the last conversation that I had with you, is just that importance of falling in love with the problem.
Yeah.
And it's so important these days because the potential solutions to problems are changing so much.
Hmm.
the technologies that we have available, the landscape in which it's in, they're changing so quickly that if you don't truly care about a problem, you're just not going to stick with it for long enough to
Right.
really
Right.
go after it and solve them.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so I really like that framework of
Well,
you know
and here's one other thing that kind of
perfect.
supports that framework. So I tell founders, talk to your customers or your potential customers. Spend your all as much time as possible doing that, and don't tell them anything about your product or about any features, and don't ask them if this will fix that problem.
Yeah,
Don't just talk about the
yeah,
problems. Ask them why that's a problem. Ask them what it costs them. Ask them how much they feel personally impacted by the problem. Ask them historically, what have they done to try to mitigate this problem, or have they? If they have, if they used other software to try to mitigate it, did it work? Where did it fall short? Why aren't you still using it?
yeah,
Why don't there's other solutions out there? Why haven't you tried using those? Get
yeah,
into the history of the problem. Problem. They will talk because they want to talk about their problems. They
yeah,
want somebody to hear them and understand. They don't want to talk about your features. They're not going to be
yeah,
honest with you about your product, but they will be honest with you about the problems they're struggling with, especially if they recognize that you really care about the problem and you really want to understand it. And you've heard other people talk about the problem and they've found some ways of reducing the impact of the problem doing this or that. Have you tried those things? This is what this will teach you what to build.
I love it. Yeah, yeah, I love all that. And to all the leaders or all the listeners who are thinking like, "Well, I'm deep inside a company, I don't have a customer." Everybody has a customer. And I think that's really important to remember. I think some of the best organizations that I work
Yeah.
with often use this idea of everybody in the company, wherever you sit, you have a supplier and you have a customer, and you need to figure out
Right.
who what in your customer, maybe they're internal, maybe they're external, but it's about having that obsession with your customer, whoever they are, to understand their problems, and that's how you can
Right.
be successful. Yeah,
Everybody has a job, if that has a job, which is anybody who's earning money, and a lot of people that aren't,
yeah,
have to deliver something to someone,
right,
right? So it's so if you don't think you have a customer, then why are you working, right? What are you're producing something, or preventing things from being produced, or whatever your job is, that you're doing it for some stakeholder of that thing.
yeah,
And
exactly,
so and understanding that person and what they're struggling with and what matters to them will help inform you how to do your job better, right? It's
absolutely,
doesn't matter where you are, right? But people just want their problems mitigated. That's what drives all of us. People
yeah,
think it's about excitement and happiness, and that is just a way of getting over this fear of missing out and
yeah.
and being sad and struggling.
Yeah, I mean, human psychology, Tony Robbins always talks about there's two ways to motivate people. Either, people either flee pain or pursue pleasure. And
Right.
usually, for most people, the much stronger lever is fleeing pain. It's the
Right.
much stronger lever. And so, identifying those problems, solving those problems is the true way to help people the most.
And I think pursuing pleasure is just a version of the other anyway,
I could
because you
see
only
that. Yeah.
pursue pleasure because you have fear that you're not having enough pleasure in your life, or some
Yeah.
fear, something's motivating you away from a point,
Yeah.
which is why you look for these other. Yeah, if you were perfectly happy and satisfied and thrilled every moment of your life, there would be no reason to ever pursue pleasure. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Interesting. Interesting. I want to shift the conversation a little bit from focusing specifically kind of on the leader to broader teams. Again, when we last spoke, you used this great phrase where you said, exceptional teams leave artifacts.
right.
What did you mean by that?
Yeah. They produce artifacts as a natural process of what they do that makes them exceptional. So, what I mean
Okay.
by that is, exceptional teams um, uh, uh, create very predictable results at a very high quality all the time. So, to do that, they have to have systems and protocols in place, that they follow, and ways of measuring it. So, there's output as a result of that. For example, um, uh, we track time spent doing everything. Everybody tracks it. It's very easy. It takes a minute or two every day to basically put a bullet in a timesheet and say, I did this. And it can be
Yeah.
a 5 word sentence, right? And
Yeah.
if they have 3 bullets in the day or 4 bullets, it's plenty, right? And that way we can track exactly what they did and where they spent their time. Um, uh, as a result of that, we can take that and do produce reports and analytics and give it to our clients that show how the time was spent. We also go to a very deep detail for all of our estimates, whether it's a brand new product we're building or it's new functionality on top of an existing product or new features or whatever that is. Or a refactoring, whatever that thing is that we're doing an estimate for, we break it down into a lot of detail. We look at downstream effects. We look at, any kind of conversion, deployment costs, whatever that is, in terms of effort and time. And we can report all this. So we know what we were expected to deliver from build to build to build, from major release to major release. We know when it was expected to be done and how much effort we were supposed to spend to get there. And we have all the actuals, which from a daily, weekly, monthly basis of what we actually did, how much we actually spent, how long it actually took, and we make it a habit of every week in our status reports to our clients, we produce a report that shows this is what we did last week, this is what we expected to do, this is where we are month to date, this is what we expected to be month to date, here's where we are year to date or quarter to date, right? This is our actual. What's our variance? Is our variance more than 10%? Then we need to spend some time and do a postmortem and explain to the client, maybe somebody was sick or out, maybe we ran into an unexpected problem and that we thought we understood the technology we did, whatever makes that. And our goal is to always be less than 10% variance from what we
Yeah.
estimate to what the actuals are. But to do that, you have to track all that. To be able to
Yeah.
track all that, you have to have an exceptional team, and that
Yes.
has been inculcated, that understands the
Yes.
need for this, not that's
Yes.
being forced to do it, but that just does it as a
I
natural
get it.
DNA of the right. These are artifacts.
Have you ever read Cal Newport?
No.
No. So Cal Newport, he's probably my second favorite author. One of his great books is a book called Deep Work, and actually, A World Without Email is probably my favorite book of his. But
Well, I already like him. A world without email.
yeah, exactly. Everybody's like, "Oh, wouldn't that be amazing?" But what you were just saying really reminded me of a lot of what he talks about, because kind of what he says, he spends a lot of time kind of comparing uh, in what happened to industrial work during the Industrial Revolution to what's happening
Mhm.
today with information workers,
Right.
and that one of the big backlash, what happened during the first Industrial Revolution, is that we had all these craftsmen who could kind of work however they wanted to. They were artisans. They took a lot of pride in their work, and a lot of the backlash about the Industrial Revolution is we kind of systematized a lot of their work, and some of them felt like they were losing things, but we gained tons of productivity. And one of his arguments is that what we're going through today in information work is similar, in that
Mhm.
historically we've thought of the workplace, especially for information workers or white collar workers or whatever you want to call them, as the right way to do it is to be very hands off, not be very specific about the outcome you want, but don't be specific or proscriptive about how to get that work done. You leave that up to the experts who can do their thing. And similar to what I'm hearing, what you're saying is, and this is, I think, what Cal Newport talks about is like, you know, you don't need every software engineer to spend a portion of their time figuring out how they're going to document their work or answering the emails or keeping track of the other project, figuring out their own method for project management. The
Mm.
most effective workplace is going to be one where the system for how the other stuff gets done, the documentation, the project planning, that needs to be a very robust system. And
Right.
then the workers don't have to figure all that out. And 100% of their energy can be devoted to getting the work done because they don't have to spend time worrying about all this other stuff. That's at
Right.
least some of what I heard in what you were saying. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that I think is exactly right. And one of the ways that we're able to accomplish this, so I have a hiring philosophy, and that is I only hire people if they're smarter than I am.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
and then that ball rolls uphill. So my director of operations, who's really smart, it's hard to find people smarter than her, but again, she only hires people if they're smarter than she is, right? In
Yeah.
terms of what they're able to deliver in the context of what they're being hired to do.
Yeah.
Because if they're because otherwise you send the wrong message to the team if you don't hire
Yeah.
people that are smarter, that pick up, they elevate the team and add value to everybody. But also
Yeah.
then you're also having to carry people, that which means that you can't. So I look at it like this. Our job as me as a company owner and director of operations and project manager, our job is basically chimney sweeps. Our job is to sweep all the impediments out of the chimney
Yes.
so that our developers, our QA people, our analysts can just work fast and freely and be creative and add value to the systems and the processes,
Yeah.
not to drive them. Our job is
Yeah.
not to drive them. We want to
Yeah.
motivate them in terms of we're working on exciting things, look at the cool things we're doing, but then we want them to be create a vacuum in front of us, right?
Yeah.
Because they're going so fast and so broadly that it's sucking all the oxygen, and we're rushing to fill it back in from behind,
Yeah.
not pushing them. So, so that's kind of how I look at our role as as managers. Is
Yeah.
it's a bottom. It's a we lead from underneath.
Yeah. I like that. I like that. To play devil's advocate for a second, because I can hear somebody saying, you're saying that your job as a people manager is to remove all the impediments. But on the other hand, you're saying you have these like very prescriptive rules about document it this way, do this thing, put it in here at this time. Aren't
Mhm.
those barriers to getting to the work?
They're systems that they work within. So no matter who you
Okay.
are, you're
Yeah.
always working within a system of some kind unless you're working by
Yes.
yourself. And if you work
Yes.
by yourself, you start to develop systems because otherwise you end up losing big chunks of work because you didn't back it up properly, or
Yes.
you end up rewriting things because you didn't abstract it properly, or whatever. As you start
Yes.
to
Yes.
develop your own systems, right? So we're providing these systems and protocols, and we're providing a lot of automation around it so that
Yes.
they don't have to do a lot with it, right? They just have to
Yeah.
learn it. And then we provide a lot of management scaffolding that can account for the work that they've done and remind them what they're missing and that they need to do this until they get into the habit of doing those things. But we don't have people that are pushing back on, oh God, here's another
Yeah.
rule that we have to follow. It's not like that.
Yeah.
There are certain things, like we have standard operating procedures when we develop a screen, for example. We want our styling, our prompts on the screen to look and behave a certain way. So,
Yep.
but we document all this stuff, right? And
Yep.
we teach our developers, when you're doing something, go to the place where all the SOPs are and look up the SOPs for your particular for the thing that you're working on and see if there is one. If not, then don't worry about it.
Yep.
And we document playbooks, so that everybody understands if they have to do something that follows certain protocol, there's a playbook that documents it, and that gives you all the visual flows and everything. And we have to do some of that because we have a lot of projects that are compliance oriented,
Yeah.
like healthcare, law enforcement, and we have to follow very strict compliance guidelines. In those cases, that has to be enforced, and
Yeah.
wrapped around the project. But everybody knows that going into these projects. And they just learn what those workflows are, even how a bug is reported, how that gets,
Yeah.
the feedback loop, the flow through development and tests. All that has to be very accurate because we get audited, yearly by a third party auditor on whether we have the last 6 months we've been compliant
Yeah.
in a pristine way or not.
Yeah.
Um, Nothing to do to get around those things other than provide automation and
Yep.
tools that make the documentation really easy and effortless to stay within those guidelines.
Well, I love how you pointed out that the creation of systems is just natural, that it just does happen. Because I used to
Mhm.
always say that I thought organizations that had the most disdain for bureaucracy were the most likely to succumb to bureaucracy and red tape, because like
Right, exactly.
bureaucracy, it's a thing that just naturally occurs in a large organization, and the way to avoid it is to embrace it and deliberately plan it out and plan those structures. And I
And
think
include
systems
everybody. Yeah,
and include
include everybody in
everybody.
that
Yeah.
process. Yeah,
Exactly, and I think that's the same. What's true at the organizational level is true at the small team and even the individual level. Of if you're going to get work done, you have to develop systems, and so you might as well be proactive about it and really think about it. Yeah,
right,
because as you say, exceptional teams have those artifacts. It's not an accident that you
right.
achieve exceptional results again and again. There's systems there that you can point to and say that is why they are achieving those exceptional results.
And we have a kind of a philosophy that we're never good enough either. And we're
Yeah, yeah,
never
yeah,
we're never exceptional enough. And so we understand the gaps that we
yep,
have and where those gaps can make us better and faster and
yep,
more accurate and improved quality and improved team morale and in every respect, right?
yep,
So
yep,
because what'll happen is if you don't constantly strive for all that stuff, right? Then like I was saying, and like you were saying, everybody starts to build their own systems for the things that they're doing all the time. Then you've got
exactly.
two or three different people doing similar things with completely different systems in place.
Yes,
And there's no consistency from one project to the next, or from even one developer to the next in terms of how they're creating and developing and communicating and orchestrating, right?
yeah, yeah,
And then and that's not uncommon, by the way. That's probably fairly common in most development teams that there's some of that, and that's
yep,
and I call that sort of the average mediocre development team that's productive, but they but they have all these limitations because of this lack of highways,
yeah,
technology
yep,
highways internally.
yeah, yeah. Well, this has been great. I mean, I think if I think back to the conversation, kind of the two biggest takeaways that I would have for a leader at any level in any organization. Number one, it's the importance of understanding your customer and their problems. That is the kind of the path forward to making sure you're not creating what you don't need to create, building what you don't need to build, and that you really get passionate about solving the problems of your customers. And then once you're clear on that, if you want to deliver on those, solving those in an exceptional way,
Mhm.
David and I are giving you
Yeah.
the green light to create systems and rules for your team, because I do think a lot of new leaders are hesitant to do that. They don't like me, whether there's systems there or not, they're very hesitant to create standards of how work is done on a team. You don't want to be draconian about it because you said include everybody. You don't want to say like this, it's my way or the highway. But I think that hopefully this episode gives you the green light, gives people the green light to start to have that conversation of norming the ways that you get work done on your team so you can get it
Mhm.
done faster.
Do we have time for me to add one more aspect to that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so one other thing is maybe you're thinking well, actually two other things. One is the idea of playbooks. When you have a
Yep.
system that does work really well, and you have a lot of tribal um, uh, tribal intelligence around the thing, like you've got a few people that really know how to do this certain thing,
Yep.
have them
Yep.
start to document these processes in playbooks. And if you say, "Oh, I can't because there's just too many decisions," I call those nuances. Then have them document the nuances, the
Yeah.
decision point, and when they veer off the standard approach to doing that. And there may be lots of those, but
Yeah.
that's okay. Because when you want to scale and bring new people in, you don't want them sucking all the energy out of your most productive people that know how to do
Yes.
these things well. You want those people only to do some high level training to get them started and give them a resource where they can find out all the nuances and every little aspect of that job because it's all been documented really solidly in a playbook. So that's
Yeah.
number one. And playbooks aren't, you don't build the whole playbook for your business all at once. You do it kind of
Yes.
one little
Yes.
panel at a time, right? And you
Yes.
just keep evolving it. Right.
The
There's
number of companies that get bogged down in forever and like, okay, we're creating the official we're just documenting it all today. It's like
Yeah,
you're never going to get done.
that just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But playbooks just recognize the more you have this stuff documented, the more your business is worth, because somebody that might
Yes.
eventually buy your business is also buying all of this
Yeah.
documented knowledge about how to operate effectively. The second thing is if you're not sure about where to grow exceptionalism, or how would you know that you get there, that sort of thing, you probably don't have a system of measuring yet.
Yeah.
And that's the place where you start, because you
Okay.
can't become exceptional if you don't have a way of measuring it. And if you don't know where have a way of measuring how not exceptional you are yet, then you need that before you start. Because once you start to measure it, you start to recognize what has to transform to start to bring you to that to a higher level.
Yeah.
So systems of measurement are like critical success factor for becoming exceptional.
I love it. Those last two bits were absolutely perfect. If anybody happens to be listening, since we got a lot of, I know we have a lot of engineers that listen, thinking about their next company. If they're looking for help with some software, where can they find you?
They can find me at techies.com.
Okay.
Techies is spelled Tekyz,
Yes.
Tekyz.com. If you've made it all the way to the end of the show, then I'll give you my email. It won't be in the links, but it's David at techies.com. And I'm easy to find on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Yeah. Everybody, make sure to prove to David that you made it to the end and email him directly with your questions. This has been great. Thank you so much, David.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
Thank you so much for listening to today's show. If you are looking for help turning your organization's great engineers into great managers, me and my team at Better Everyday Studios would love to help. We deliver targeted and interactive training workshops that are designed to help build the 3 fundamental skills of any new manager: building trust, giving feedback, and setting goals. Reach out to me through matt@bettereverydaystudios.com so we can start making your organization better every day.